Do you find yourself doom scrolling a lot these days? I do. When I catch myself in that endless loop of bad news and teeny tiny dopamine hits, I know I need to do something with my hands. Something tangible. I started making these weird little hand pillows last spring and couldn't stop. I think I made like 8 or 9 of them. They're silly, kind of creepy, but mostly just really fun to sew. When I first started, I was looking online for a sewing pattern to use, but I couldn't find one, so I made my own. And if you want to download my hand pillow sewing pattern, it's in the description below. Once you download, you'll have the sewing pattern for both the giant and the mini hand pillow that you can print out and make at home with detailed instructions with lots of photos. I love the giant hand pillow as a body pillow and the mini one as a head pillow or a decorative throw pillow. So if you're feeling stuck, anxious, or just bored out of your mind, this is your message. Put down your phone and let's make some hand pillows. In this video, I'll show you exactly how to make your own hand pillow from start to finish. Let's make something weird and wonderful together. First, you'll need your tools: a ruler, sewing machine, iron, lighter, Sharpie or fabric pen, pins, sewing needle, seam ripper, sharp fabric shears, washers or weights, and a large wooden stir spoon or spatula if you're making the mini hand pillow. For fabric, you'll need about 2 3/4 yards for the giant hand pillow and 1.5 yards of fabric for the mini hand pillow pattern. So step 1 is print and assemble the pattern. My sewing pattern is super easy to use and will save you a lot of time. So once you've printed out the pattern, cut out the hand, the ruffle, and the nail patterns, and you should have something that looks like this. Step 2, cut out the hand. So first determine the right and wrong sides of your fabric. It's not always easy to figure this part out, but just choose what you're going to call the right and the wrong side and just stick with that. Fold your fabric in half with the wrong sides facing out. Use an iron to create a crisp fold. Place the hand pattern along the bias of the folded fabric. This will add a small amount of stretch to your pillow and will look better overall once you stuff the pillow. If you have washers or small weights, place them at the tips of the fingertips and the bottoms of the wrist. Pin the two sides together along the inside edge of the hand, especially along the fingers and the U-shaped areas between each finger. Carefully cut on the inside of your traced line. You should now have 2 fabric hands that mirror each other. Step 3. Create the nails. Here's a tip. You will see the raw edge of this fabric, so choose a fabric that will not easily fray, like thick non-stretch velvet, which is what I'm using here. And again, you're going to want to determine what the wrong and right size of your nail fabric is. Place the nail pattern on the wrong side of the fabric that you will use. Trace this pattern 5 times to create the 5 fingernails that you will sew onto the fingers. Using sharp fabric shears, cut on the inside of the traced lines. Slightly melt the edges of each nail with a lighter. Make sure to do this in a well-ventilated space. Melting the edges of the nails does 2 things. It prevents fraying and it clears up fuzzy edges. Step 4. Create the ruffle. First, trace the ruffle pattern with a Sharpie or a fabric marker and cut out the ruffle pattern. Then fold the pattern lengthwise with the wrong sides facing out. Pin the iron and seam for a crisp fold. With the wrong side still facing out, sew the short ends of the fabric together with matching thread. Make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end of each seam. Next, carefully trim the inner corners off the inside. This will make the edge of the ruffle pointier. Make sure not to cut the seam. Turn the fabric inside out so that the right sides of the fabric are now facing out. Press the corners of the ruffles for a pointy tip. Now, choose a contrasting thread color to create the ruffle. You will not see this thread when the pillow is complete, but it is important to see this thread as you make the ruffle. Make sure you leave a long tail of extra thread, about 10 inches or longer. Set your stitch length to the longest possible length. My machine goes to 5, so I set it to that. Make sure not to backstitch at all this time. So without doing a backstitch, sew 1/4 of an inch along the inside and long end of the fabric. When you come to the end of the fabric, do not backstitch and again leave a long tail of extra thread, about 10 inches or longer. Gently tug on one end of the thread to gather the fabric together. You can also tug on both ends of the thread to meet the ruffles in the middle. If your thread breaks, which it probably will, simply remove the thread with a seam ripper and start again with a long straight stitch. This part is honestly can be kind of stressful because your thread can break, but with some patience you'll get it all into the shape that you need it to be in. Continue bunching up the fabric along the thread until it is about 1/2 inch or so smaller than the width of the wrist. So after much finger cramping and patience, you will have a ruffle that looks a lot like this. Space out the ruffles to create even gathers. Once your ruffle is the correct length, sew a straight stitch along the same edge with your default stitch length. Mine is 2.5. So I set it to that. If after this part you find that your ruffle is a little too long to fit inside the wrist, run the edge of your ruffle through the sewing machine again as you manually bunch up the ruffles. So as you're going along, you're going to bunch up the ruffles and then push it along, and then you're like slowly compacting it into this ruffle shape. So you should end up with a ruffle that looks like this. And just make sure that the finished ruffle is about 1/2 inch shorter than the wrist. You want to leave about 1/4 inch on each side. Step 5. Sew nails into the hand. First, decide the orientation of your hand pillow. Is it right-handed or left-handed? In this instruction, I create a left-handed pillow. So measure about 1.5 inches from the top of each finger for the giant hand pillow, or 3/4 of an inch for the mini hand pillow. And pin all the nails so that they are centered, and install matching thread into your sewing machine. We will sew very close to the edge of the nail, so make sure that you take your time with this step if you're a beginner. Place the needle 1/8 of an inch from the edge of the nail. Backstitch when you start sewing the corner of the nail. Once you reach the other side of the nail, lift the presser foot without lifting the needle. Rotate the fabric around the needle to continue your stitch. When you reach the end of the nail, backstitch again and follow these steps for the other 4 nails. Step number 6. Sew the ruffle into the hand. Place the wrong sides of the hand facing out. On the wrist, sandwich the ruffle between the 2 hands with the raw edge of the ruffle slightly hanging. Make sure to leave 1/4 inch space on the outermost sides of the ruffle. Pin the wrist portion together with the ruffle sandwiched between the 2 sides of the hand pattern. Sew a straight stitch 1/2 inch at your default stitch length along the wrist portion. Make sure to backstitch at the beginning and end of the stitch. Once you've sewn your straight stitch across the bottom of the wrist, it should look like this. Step number 7. Sew the hand. Pin the top corners of the ruffle onto one side of the hand pillow away from the edge of the hand. Orient the pin towards the bottom of the wrist so that it's easier to take out. This step will ensure that you do not accidentally sew the ruffle into the edge of the hand. With the wrong sides of the fabric still facing out, pin the 2 sides of the hand together. Using a Sharpie, chalk, or fabric marker, mark off where you will leave an opening to turn the pillow inside out and stuff the pillow. This is very important. I leave an 8-inch opening on the inky side of the hand, but you can make it bigger if you need to. Once you've pinned the 2 sides of the hand pillow together, change the default stitch settings so that it's a little shorter. So you want slightly shorter stitches. The default stitch on my machine is 2.5, so I set my shorter stitch to 2. These shorter stitches will make the seam stronger and will prevent seam ripping when you stuff your pillow. Start your seam on one side of the wrist and sew 1/4 inch from the edge with your shorter straight stitch. Forward stitch and back stitch at the beginning and end of each sewing, especially at the edges of the opening. Tip: take your time when sewing the small U-shaped areas between the fingers. Lift the presser foot and rotate the fabric around the needle as much as you need to sew a smooth U shape. This will prevent any weird puckering from happening once you stuff your pillow. Once you've sewn around the edge of the hand, except for the opening, turn your pillow inside out. If you are making a mini hand pillow or your forearms don't fit into the fingers, turn the fingers inside out with a stir spoon. Step number 8. Stuff your pillow. Start stuffing your pillow from the furthest finger from the opening. Tip: use small handfuls of stuffing to avoid lumps and ensure even distribution. Work the stuffing into the fingers first and then stuff them generously and press against the edges of the seams. Use your stir spoon to stuff the fingers of the mini hand pillow. Once you have stuffed the fingers, begin stuffing the palm of the hand with small handfuls at a time. Stop stuffing when you are satisfied with the firmness or softness of your pillow. Step number 9. Close the opening with a ladder stitch. Get a sewing needle to manually sew the opening and make a double thread. Fold the hem of the opening inward. You want to match the 1/4 inch seam allowance on both sides of the stitch. Iron the hem to create a crisp fold. It should look like this once you're done ironing. Use a ladder stitch to close the opening. And that's it! You just made your very own hand pillow. Weird, whimsical, slightly unhinged, and totally lovable. Whether you went for the full glam velvet nails or you use secondhand fabric, every hand pillow ends up with its own vibe. That's what makes them so fun to make. And trust me, once you make one, you'll want to sew up an entire creepy little family. If you want the printable pattern pieces for both the giant and mini sewing patterns and your own step-by-step guide, head over to my Etsy shop. The link is in the description box below. You'll get everything you need to start making your own hand pillows tonight, and you will thank yourself for creating rather than consuming, and for making a pillow rather than doom scrolling. I'll see you next time for more strange and joyful art. Bye bye.